I desperately want them to be able to continue to provide food. We were working in South Sudan right now. There's 100,000 refugees that are
Wow.
stuck because of a civil war. But what nobody wants, including the South Sudanese, is a lecture on DEI initiatives
Right.
in order to get your
Yeah.
rice. If the church won't get our act together, there is another great commission happening by the enemy to
Yes.
indoctrinate, whether it's the Dominican Republic, whether it's Africa, Asia, like the Caribbean. They are attaching U.S. dollars
Mm-hmm.
to changing definitions of sexuality and gender. You can't eat if you won't accept this kind of policy.
Wow. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to the show. This is the Alisa Childers podcast. I'm Alisa Childers, and it's my goal to equip Christians to identify the core beliefs of historic Christianity, discern its counterfeits, and proclaim the gospel with clarity, kindness, and truth. And today's show is another episode in our pastor series. I'm going to be talking with an old friend. This is Pastor Darren Tyler of Conduit Church right here in the area where I live. Before we get to that, though, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Brave Books, which is a Christian children's entertainment company. It's so great. Go to bravebooks.com and use the code Childers for 20% off your purchase. So I want to tell you a little bit about this episode because we actually recorded this a long time ago, several months ago, actually. I guess it's a good problem to have on the podcast that I have so many interviews already recorded, and we can only release so many at a time because it's my husband and I that do all this, and we can only manage about 1 or 2 episodes a week. And so this episode that I recorded with Darren has kind of been sitting just on the computer. And when I listened back to it yesterday, I thought, what an absolutely perfect, timely episode for right now. And I'm really excited for you to get to hear it for a couple of reasons. One, because Darren's just such a good old friend of Mike and I. And when I met Darren, like over 20 years ago, he wasn't a pastor yet. He was a manager in contemporary Christian music. And so on this episode, we even talk about some of the pitfalls of the CCM industry, and we talk about all the amazing relief work that Darren and his church do all over the world. And with that said, I want to let you know that because we recorded it a few months ago, some of the information is a little bit possibly out of date because he was commenting on the U.S. aid and the defunding that was going on and kind of his opinion on that, which I still think is so relevant. What he was actually sharing about that is so relevant and so important. So, but I did want to acknowledge that the politics of some of that may have changed between then and now, but the principles that we talked about, I think, are very timely and timeless. So I'm very excited for you to get to hear them. I think you're going to love this conversation. There's so many highlights and nuggets. Darren is, and I say this in the beginning of the interview, he's one of those pastors that really does amazing work all over the world, digging wells, providing food, clothing, rescuing slaves, and yet hasn't bowed his knee to wokeness. He holds the gospel at the center, and we talk about that. So without any further ado, this is Darren Tyler. I would love, first of all, okay, so each pastor that I have on, I kind of say the thing about that pastor that I really appreciate. And the thing that of course, we've known each other probably longer than I've known any of the other pastors that I've interviewed for this. But what I really love about you, I always describe you as somebody who has really figured out the sweet spot of really being the hands and feet of Jesus all over the world without falling into the social justice gospel. And that's not easy to do.
No, that's pretty high praise because I can say that in if you were like somewhere in the mid 2000s, I feel like I could have gone that way. Like when you were in the world you were in, because on paper, which is why I went back and I revisited that article that you did for Cross Examine Social Justice Taking Over the Gospel, because it was helpful for me when I realized if you go down this hole, you basically end up in this neo-Marxist social justice critical theory hole that technically might say they want the same thing that I would want, which was I want everyone to be able to eat. I want everyone, to feel loved and to be known. But the methodology is where we 100% diverged, and that was, thank God I did that before I became a pastor, so I wasn't trying to figure that out in real time. I at least had landed by that point that the gospel has to be the middle of that because I mean, you get free lunch, but no hope.
Right, right. And so I really want to dig into some
Yeah.
of the stuff that you do all over the world because you're even seeing how progressive ideology can erode the
Yeah.
ability to even minister in other countries. We're going to get into all that, but I want to
Yeah.
back up a little bit and talk. So you were in music before you were a
Right.
pastor. So I want to talk about that journey of what led you from being, and when I knew you, you were a manager, but
Yeah.
should I guess and say you also were a musician at some point?
So, Childers won't remember this, your husband over here, but I maybe even before Mike was in there, I was a bass player,
Okay.
mostly because it was the only thing people would pay me money for. I wasn't good enough. But I did. I have a little cameo in the Basics of Life video for him in
No kidding. Are you
1992.
serious?
100% factual statement.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I
Mike,
got
are you in that video or no?
no,
No. Okay.
no, we were just window dressing. Like
Okay.
it was, you know what I mean? Like we just needed, it was me, Jamie Davis, Willie Davis from Carmen's
Oh,
band.
that's
Any of these
amazing.
names bringing back memories? There you go. Wild Willie.
So everybody will have to go and look at that
Yeah,
online.
maybe not. But so that was where I did start. I wanted to do that. And then there's a moment where I looked in the mirror and I would see guys, well, like Childers. I'd see actual musicians and think, I'm not very good at this. I probably need to find a backup plan for this. So I just, stumbled into becoming a talent agent first in the early '90s,
Yeah.
which I washed up again on the For Him Shore because I was at William Morris for a season where we booked For Him, kept Mike on the road a lot. It seems like back then.
Yep.
Um, and then became a manager somewhere around 2000. I had like a mini Jerry Maguire moment.
Did you?
I don't know if that happened to you, but most of the people that I knew that started in the Christian music world, we had this idea that this was a ministry
Yeah.
opportunity.
It's disillusioning to be in
A
that
little bit.
industry. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, fame and Christianity are strange bedfellows.
Yeah.
Monetizing the gospel. I mean, there's complexities to it, right? People,
Sure.
needed to feed their families, but you know how it is. But so I was really struggling with that. But the thing I struggled with the most there was that we had like 30 clients at any given moment. And I was just booking bands, booking artists all day long, but there was no infrastructure in place at all for loving and caring for artists. They're not in a church family. They're
Yeah.
completely
I wasn't.
disconnected. Yeah, there's no way you can be, really. Churches will start like a Tuesday night, but you got home Monday, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
You're just trying to get laundry done before you leave Thursday. So,
Right.
so all that to say, I mean, I had the Jerry Maguire moment for me was we're throwing all these artists up against the wall, seeing which one sticks, and then we'd go with that one. But then for everyone that stuck, there were 10 that didn't. And it felt like I was being disrespectful, but I wasn't stewarding their calling, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's no disrespect to any of my colleagues that are in that world, because many of them, including my boss at that time, Charles Doris, just a very godly man.
He books me now.
Charles does?
Yeah.
See? This is what I'm saying.
Full circle.
Yeah, that's amazing. Don't mess with Charles' coffee.
Okay.
Like 2:00 every day, he'd throw up a fresh pot. But if you come in, I've never seen Charles flapped ever. But if you walk in and pour before it's done brewing,
Yeah.
it does not go well. Now, maybe he's had help.
That's correct.
It's
You
correct.
cannot. Yeah. You have to let it finish. Yeah.
But he would get angry, and it was the most hilarious, adorable thing. Because
Yeah. If people knew him, like
so
he's
kind.
such a gentle,
Yes.
sweet man.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I can't even imagine him getting mad.
No,
But
he's like banging around the pot. Like,
Yeah.
you can't just pour this out and throw it back in.
That's funny.
But so, yeah, I did that. So 2000s when I had the mini Jerry Maguire moment, I quit. Told my wife on the way home that's not recommended for marriage advice. But we started a management firm after that, because the theory I had was there was no pastoral influence, or not enough.
Yeah.
And so what if I could, as a manager, not be their pastor? That's not my job, but also at the same time being very much involved in investing in the spiritual
Yeah.
walks with the
So
artists.
needed, because really the whole industry is set up, it really sets you up to fail spiritually.
Yes.
And I'm not
yes.
putting the blame on that on any individual person. It's
Yeah.
just, it's a machine, and
Yeah.
there's not a lot of accountability. And I know I was really struggling by the end of my
Yeah.
time in the industry. Yeah.
It's a lot to put on and especially young, right?
Hmm.
Because we want to start them young because you don't have any expenses, so you can,
Right.
you can jump in the van and trailer. There's no kids at home that you're trying to feed, but you're also young, so you haven't figured out a lot about life, or worse, your theology. So
Yeah.
you're learning theology in other churches from, or even worse, other bands.
Yeah.
Um, and so you end up with, I think what we saw that you addressed so very well in these last 10 years, I guess now, is that a lot of the artists that have they're on the scenic route,
Hmm.
through deconstruction.
Hmm.
Most of them, they're there because they did not have a foundation in the word. So that
Yeah.
when you've had conversations with some of my friends and that have in that road, and I think, yeah, that's actually not Jesus. Like that person you're describing that you've rejected because you're rejecting God, that's not God. But they didn't know that because they
Yeah.
didn't have a foundation in the word. So that was the management road for me. We spent a lot of time on the road with literally, I didn't even know it was called expository teaching.
Yeah.
It's kind of embarrassing now.
No, I didn't know about that
Um,
either.
like I
Yeah.
didn't know it was a word. I just
Yeah.
thought, well, that's what we do. So we do Bible studies in the back lounge. We do, Bible studies. I'd whiteboard out like, just the gospel in general,
Mm.
creation, fall, redemption, restoration.
Yeah.
Shockingly a large amount of young artists
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Sure.
So that was how I spent the 2000s. And I think that's when we were a small
We
little
went to
church.
church together. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the really interesting way, because I knew you from the industry, but then we ended up going to church together. And then from there is when I ended up going to the other church
Right.
that went off a cliff, and that I ended up having a faith crisis as a result of. And then you
Mhm.
sort of ended up kind of going into the pastorate. So talk about that, because I know that I don't know if you remember this, but I was at the very first meeting of Conduit. I can't tell you how many problems GoodRanchers.com has solved in my life. I love that I have heritage breed pork, better than organic chicken, grass-fed beef, ready to go in my freezer. Just this week, had a last-minute get-together with a bunch of people, and they're all coming to the house. And, I didn't even have to go to the grocery store. I just pulled out some of those chicken breasts and steaks, thawed them out. We're going to grill them up. It's going to be so easy. Plus, of course, I'm going to make sourdough bread because that's what I love to do. But that's why I love Good Ranchers, because they have a commitment to American sourcing. So it gives you food you can actually trust. And that's going to be great coming into backyard barbecue season. So over 85% of grass-fed beef that's sold in U.S. stores is imported. Maybe you didn't know that, but they solved the problem at Good Ranchers because all of their meat is 100% American, born, raised, and harvested. It's also free from any kind of hidden additives, no antibiotics or hormones, no seed oils, and they deliver it straight to your door. So, like in my case, no last minute grocery shopping, especially when you have people coming over. So, if you go to goodranchers.com, use my code Alisa, you're going to get $40 off, and then you're going to get to choose a free add on for the life of your subscription. So, again, go to goodranchers.com, use my code Alisa for a free add on for the life of your subscription and $40 off.
I do remember
It
that
was where the
at
Sweet
the
CC's is
listening
now.
room.
Yeah, it was called the listening room. Isn't it Sweet CC's
Sweet
now?
CC's now.
Yeah.
I was just telling my daughter
Yeah.
this
I was
yesterday
there.
because we're driving by Sweet CC's, and my daughter, who's 24 now, was not old enough to remember
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Now, what I didn't know at that point was how I didn't know the faith journey that you
I don't think I
were
had
on.
I
Hadn't
don't
started
think I
yet?
had started that, because I think
Okay.
I was still going to the old church, and then you had
Okay.
sort of broken off to start this new thing. And I remember, because like I sometimes wonder, like, what would my journey have been like if I would have just decided to keep going there
Interesting.
instead of
That's
going to the.
interesting.
But God is
Yeah.
sovereign. I really, looking back today,
Yeah.
I was just talking about this on someone else's podcast today. Like, I'm so thankful for my faith crisis, and
Yeah.
I think I may not have had one had I
Yeah. But
stayed
you know
there.
what? Because I can tell you what would have happened is you would have found your footing in your faith. Great. Awesome. But you wouldn't have had this journey that you went
Yeah,
on that's literally now
all this.
it's
Yeah.
changing the lives of hundreds of
Oh,
thousands of
hope
people
so. Yeah.
that I know personally. I mean, I'm still pleasantly surprised when I was in Dallas a few weeks ago now, and I was with some other pastors, and they were just talking about you like in a whole other separate
Oh,
separate group. And have you guys heard of this? Another gospel. And
oh,
so your resources are not just reaching people that need to hear it. You're also empowering, you're teaching, you're tooling people that need to know what to say in this cultural moment. So, and you may not remember this, but it was about 10 years ago when you were first starting to spread your wings, and you started doing for a youth group
Yes. Yeah.
every year. But I remember saying, in my mind, I remember this, but as Mark Twain says, the older I get, the more vividly I remember things that didn't happen. But I remember a conversation of like, man, I hope you do this because I feel like a maternal female voice inside of the apologetics world was needed, because head and heart coming together, not to over dramatic or whatever, but that's what it's felt like, is that you've brought like a very maternal, very factual, but most times when people wander down that feelings road, they end up way down weirdo roads, but you've been able to balance it so significantly, and just based upon, and I say that it's not just females, a lot of pastors, a lot of young men as well, but you've literally empowered and helped bring clarity to complex to moms that are trying to raise their
Man, I hope so.
these kids.
You know, it's funny because I've talked a lot about, I even think I wrote a whole chapter in another gospel about these kids that I was talking to, and it was at your church.
Yeah,
And
I
I
wondered
always
if
thought
that was it.
it was, yeah. So I often talk about how before I had a platform, before I even had well, I might have had a blog by then, but how I just, because people ask me like, how do I go into apologetics? And I'll say, just you stay local and see what God does with that. Because I did at your church a couple years in a row, we did like a 6-week series with the youth, and we did atheist role play and all the fun stuff. And it was really a sweet time when I was sort of cutting my teeth on teaching apologetics and getting to do that with, and just some really cool full circle moments of certain people that came to those events and everything. So it was really cool. Yeah. And
Well,
you had already been, I guess you had already started the church for a while back, but here's the thing I love about your church is that it's called Conduit because you consider yourself to be a conduit to the world. And well, as I sort of mentioned, like we could probably reminisce all day, but as we mentioned in the beginning, you so beautifully encapsulate like staying true to the gospel, but also doing things that people might consider. I mean, I hate the word social justice now, or the phrase, because it's totally been co-opted. But one of the things, well, I just would love to ask you about that. You just got back from Israel. You travel all the time. You're ministering to Christians all over the world, planting churches all over the world. You have I really want to pick your brain on the heartbeat of what's happening globally in the church, because like you shared a few things before we went on the air, but maybe just start with the mission of your church. And because I know that we partnered for a while.
It was so grateful.
You were rescuing slaves in a country in Asia that we can't even say what the country is. And we, my Patreon group was helping support that, where you would go in and buy slaves and then help them get set up. And a lot of these were persecuted Christians.
All of them are,
all of them. Oh boy. So talk about your work all over the world.
We've when we first started, we used to joke that we were a church with a mission department. And well, honestly, to take it even further, I thought that a church would ruin it. Like I'd been around church, I'd been around a couple of the same ones. And so I thought, if I deal with the church, it'll ruin it. Because there's all these voices. It was all stuff that was inaccurate and not from a good place in my heart. But for the first 4 years, the mission actually was completely separate. We maintained a separate 501c3.
Oh, wow.
And in my head, when I look back on it now, it's like, oh, that's just because I was afraid that, if I get fired, then I still have the mission, which is what I wanted to do anyway. But that said, it's all merged together, because what I learned was it isn't separate. Like our church didn't need a mission, but Jesus's mission needs a church. Like that's the mission, the vehicle through which he has chosen to accomplish his mission, to go to make disciples in all nations, is the church. There was no plan B. We have voices in especially today with what we are right now. Your voice is teaching, and it's out there, and it matters. And discipleship on a day-to-day basis happens in a local church, and that is true whether it is in East Asia or East Nashville. And so when we go into a community right now, what's happened is we called it Conduit. It turns out it was very Holy Spirit inspired. At the time, I'm just literally looking at paperwork going, I guess we had to call this something. we'd already planted 3 churches in Haiti. We'd already, been working there, but it was just flowing through my personal account, a few $100s here. So we're looking at this going, I guess we just want to be a conduit, I guess, that's what we're doing. But at that moment, it was just money, but it since has grown because I've learned, uh, money is just a tool. Like
Mhm.
I grew up and I was blessed enough to grow up in America where we were very poor, but we at least had government assistance.
Mhm.
But I also learned from that was that all I got was a free lunch and no hope.
Mm.
And I got entitlement, but I didn't get any sort of like experience to lift me into.
Yeah.
And that was where I kept going. That's the gospel. That's why it matters that we start with that, and then anything else we do is an outgrowth of that,
Yeah.
of what the gospel is. And so our church, that's just what we do. Like we in Israel, which by the way, there's a window open right now in Israel for the gospel that is
Wow.
I've never seen in my life.
Talk about that.
Like so most of the Jewish people, my friends that are Jewish that are not Jesus followers, um, are very hard to almost harder than
Mm.
than Muslims, like as far as receptive
Sure.
to the gospel.
Want to take a moment to tell you about Brave Books. I love what Brave Books is doing. It's a children's entertainment company that helps parents raise kids with character, conviction, and imagination. Some of you loved my episode with Kirk Cameron a couple weeks ago, and they've partnered with Kirk Cameron to create not only shows that are safe, but shows and books and all sorts of things that actually strengthen your kids' faith and values. And they've just released a streaming platform called Brave Plus that features carefully curated content that avoids overstimulation, promotes positive behavior, and reinforces biblical truth, all while still being fun and fun to watch with your kids. So right now, you can go to bravebooks.com and use the code Childers for 20% off your first purchase. Again, bravebooks.com, use the code Childers. Well, that makes sense because Muslims at least have a reverence for Jesus
Yeah,
in some sense, whereas Jews
right.
kind of see him as a counterfeit, as a
True.
challenger to their religion, really.
And they have experienced, and they don't differentiate between, Catholicism, Protestantism. They don't, in the
Yeah.
same way that most Christians don't do like Sunni or Shia, they don't know.
Yeah, sure.
So we're sort of all lumped into the Crusades, or we're lumped into Martin Luther, or we're lumped into stories that they've heard. But what's happening now is the whole world has turned against them,
Yeah.
and they cannot for the life of them figure out why an evangelical Christian like me or others over there that are supposed to hate them don't.
Wow.
And this is a pretty cool moment. We were in God's providence. The village that we are working in is called Enabsor, and it's right on the border of Gaza. It was like many of the villages, they lost lots of lives, lots of people still in captivity, still being held hostage. But Absor, I learned from my Jewish friend, by the way, not from my Hebrew experts like Michael Easley, who
Yeah.
I love. I know we're both friends with Michael.
Yeah.
I love Michael. But I'm standing over there with my friend Uri, and he had been in my church already in America. And he says, I wanted to wait till I got here to tell you, but you kept using the word gospel. The word Absor means gospel.
Oh, yeah.
In Hebrew, it means spring of gospel. And Absor, it's the very place where they believe David took his mighty men. The supplies were saved there before they went to attack the Amalekites, and those who were infirmed got the same reward as those who went into battle. It's just literally a picture of the gospel
Wow.
in a place called the gospel,
Wow.
spring of the gospel.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, having these conversations with them, because they're all still looking for Messiah. Like
Yeah.
Judaism teaches that a Messiah could come, a Messiah comes in every generation if that generation is worthy of it. That's one of the tenets of modern Judaism. And so they're always looking for who that might be.
Wow.
They get confused because they see the suffering servant and the conquering king, and they think that's two different people. So to be able
Right.
to weave them into one, that we did baptisms one night when we had them in Nashville, and to explain the difference between a mikvah and in the baptism of Jesus, two different things. All that to say that I think that there's a window of opportunity right now for the gospel in Israel that I've I've never seen in my lifetime, and I'm only 54, but it's exciting. And
Yeah.
we're helping him practically speaking, right?
Yeah,
We're not,
sure.
but we're very much, they know we're Christians.
Yeah.
They know exactly who we are, what we believe. And so that's been fun.
Yeah.
I will say that the one thing that seems to be, if you want to run a through thread through the ministry that we have been experienced with, is uh, we're in countries where Islam has become the primary enemy of the gospel. Which, by the way, every country where Islam,
Yeah.
they view Christians as enemies. But even there in Israel, we've got radical Islamic jihad groups,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't have a framework for that every life is valuable. They're not going to find that in the Quran.
Yeah.
So, which is why in this other country, why slaves can be slaves, because
Mm-hmm.
there's, it's not even a caste system; it's a religious system
Yeah.
in Islam. And so, yeah, you guys helped us set
Yeah.
free.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. Not just buying the slaves, but you bought them for the purpose of setting them free,
Yeah.
and then getting them set up with a business so that they could
Yeah,
exist on their own. It was heartbreaking to hear about some of those conditions.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what I love about what you do, and what I think, and of course, my church does a ton of this. There's this kind of trope that people say, "Oh, conservative Christians don't care about the poor." It's so first of all ridiculously untrue, because here's the thing that I think about too, is that it's usually the conservative Christians. They're not bragging about it, because the Bible says, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. So they're not going to be on social
Right.
media saying, oh, we're doing this and we're doing this.
Right.
But the work that's being done is amazing. And you said something to me before we went on the air that I want to ask you about next. You said something like, if the church will not go to the nations, other big corporations will, and they will indoctrinate with Marxist ideologies. And I want you to talk about that, but I want to set it up with a story, because I had a friend many years ago. This person sadly is now deconstructed and left the faith, but they had a Christian organization that was centered around adoption and helping Christian families adopt from other countries. And I remember receiving an email from the organization about 10 years before this person deconstructed. I began to see signs of it at that point. But they basically said, have made a decision that we are not going to be preaching the gospel anymore. So when we go into these other places and we connect people, like we're just going to leave the gospel out of it, because we feel like doing the good work in these places will be enough.
Yeah.
And people will see Jesus in us, but we're not going to actually be preaching the gospel anymore. And I remember thinking, well, this is the beginning of the end, because first of all, you may do some good things for a while, but and the thought that came to my head in that moment is you're just going to give people a nicer road to hell, because ultimately you're not giving them anything eternal. And so what did you mean by that when you said, if the church will not go to the nations, other people that will be very happy to indoctrinate the world?
100%. The human rights, which is what you would hear mostly say from like the UN, and of course they're redefining what rights those even are.
Yeah.
But what I have been heartbroken to see is, and you can edit out this name if you need to, but a few years ago, World Vision got a little bit of bad press because they had changed their position on marriage.
Yeah.
And so they called, I don't remember who it was, invited some local pastors in Nashville for like a focus group.
Oh, really?
To ask what they could do, right, to get the churches engaged. Now, they were walking into it, which is what I thought we were walking into, was to have the conversation about sexuality and gender, and their changing definitions of that.
Right.
But the way they started the meeting was, explaining, here's how we work in a village. Now, I'd worked with World Vision before through touring.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah.
Right. So I knew lots of amazing people. And by the way, they do great work. They do feed and disaster relief. But as they're sort of whiteboarding out, storyboarding what they do, we go to this village and we find the most, whoever the most influential person in this village is, that's who we will partner with. If it's a Christian, that's great. If it's a Muslim, an imam, that's great. And I raised my hand. It was like that right there. Like, you can stop right there, because I'm a church. I'm a Jesus follower. I have only a finite amount of resources. But if you're telling me that you guys would finance, invest in, and support a Muslim imam who believes that women are property, who believe that works-based salvation, believe that Jews are pigs and that Christians are the problem. Like if that's what you're saying, then we're already done. We could actually
Right.
end the meeting right now because we don't even have to get to the sexuality and gender. We're done with that. And by the way, my experience so far, Compassion International has continued to hold the line
Yeah.
on that, and I'm so grateful for that. There are lots of great organizations out there, but there are 100% organizations that are that are just going far to it's no longer just feeding them food, it's feeding them a narrative.
One of the things I'm asked about almost more than anything is how Christian parents can give their kids a strong biblical foundation. If you have kids that are between the ages of 4 and 12, my number one recommendation is Foundation Worldview. They have curriculums on their website that you can do in your homeschool. You can do it just as a parent with your kid. You can even integrate them into your Sunday school classes at church. And they have worldview curriculum, critical thinking, biblical sexuality, so much, how to study the Bible, so much great stuff that I think parents can learn a lot about as they go through it with their kids. So you're going to help your kids spot false ideas. It's simple for the parents. You just print the lesson, watch the video, and there's all kinds of activities to also engage their creativity. We've used it in our home. We absolutely love it. So start today and save. Don't wait to build a biblical foundation for your kids. Use the code Alisa at foundationworldview.com to get 10% off of any family license. Again, foundationworldview.com. Use my code Alisa.
And we saw it recently with what happened with these numbers being revealed with USAID, right?
Mm-hmm.
I desperately want them to be able to continue to provide food. We were working in South Sudan right now. There's 100,000 refugees that are stuck because of a civil war. But what nobody wants, including the South Sudanese, is a lecture on DEI initiatives
Right.
in order to get your
Yeah.
rice. We don't do that when we're feeding. We don't say, I know that some homeless shelters do. You got to listen to the sermon to get the food. Maybe nothing wrong with that. This is just not how we do it. We turn the well on for the community, and it's for the community. They know it's coming from the church. They know it's coming from Jesus. But that was not what World Vision was saying. We're going to support whoever it was. And then we've seen recently, like I follow Richard Stearns on social media. I don't think he's the CEO
Anymore. I don't think so.
It was sad because his book, There's a Hole in Our Gospel, actually really helped set me on the trajectory I ended up on.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it was like, it's like this part was good, but that last 10% was so crazy that I can't, that it negates the other 90%. And so what I meant, what I know I meant was, if the church won't get our act together, there is another great commission, right, happening by the enemy.
Yes.
To indoctrinate, whether it's the Dominican Republic, whether it's Africa, Asia, like the Caribbean, they are attaching U.S. dollars to changing definitions of sexuality and gender. You can't eat if you won't accept this kind of policy.
Wow.
That's happening in the government. It's also happening in some denominations. It's been pretty famous over the last few years, what's happened with the Methodist.
Yes.
This started in 2019. A pastor in Kansas City named Adam Hamilton of a very large church, very influential Methodist pastor, was saying that the Methodist Church in general now has to become fully affirming, fully inclusive, all the language that they would use. And the Methodists in Rwanda are saying, no.
Right.
There's not. We are faithful to the teachings of Jesus.
Yep.
And they, in 2019, you remember, they swayed the vote that actually
at
least held the Methodist denomination together for at least 5-6 years. Now it's obviously splintered because there weren't enough votes. But my point is in that moment, and this is, you can fact check me, but Adam Hamilton at one of these conventions said, well, maybe we need to then stop supporting financially these churches if they're not going to come on board. And the bishop of Rwanda Methodist Church said, we will not, you don't know us Africans well enough. We've survived Ebola. We've survived a civil war, right? We have been through hardship. If we have to do this on our own, but we will not sell our souls for American dollars. We will not betray the teachings of Jesus. And that stuff inspires me. Like when I come
Yeah.
back to America and the worst someone can do is send a mean tweet about me,
Mhm. Yeah.
whatever,
Right.
give it your best shot.
Yeah.
But those pastors inspire me because it's so self-evident and self-obvious to them that the Bible is God's word.
Yes.
There is no debate in it.
Mhm.
And we are changing our lives to accommodate or to match God's word, not changing God's word to accommodate our lives.
Mhm.
That's just obvious to them.
Oh,
And I tell my friends all the time, we need missionaries in America. I
yes,
need
we
you guys from
do.
Philippines, come
Yeah.
here, come from Sudan, come
Yeah.
here. Like the United States is a nation
Yeah.
that Jesus said, and we need courageous pastors coming here.
Okay, so I don't know how aware you are of there's this kind of rising movement within apologetics even and within the church trying to redefine inerrancy. And
Hmm.
the redefinition, essentially, in my view, I'm simple. I'm a simple person.
Yeah.
But the redefinition is basically saying we can still call the Bible inerrant if it has errors. Like that's
Hmm.
basically the gist of it. And so I think about something like that. I think about it's an accommodation because academic people are like, oh, well, there's these contradictions. We have to and yet and then I never can get out of my mind like the Chinese Christians when you see the video of them getting Bibles smuggled in and they're weeping, they're kissing their Bibles. They can't wait to open up, of course, I don't know if I'm sure you've read The Insanity of God by
Yeah.
Neil Ripken, and
Yeah.
you read about these persecuted Christians all over the world who each memorize a different book of the Bible or chapter of a book of the Bible so that they can come together, might have a page ripped out of a
Yes.
Bible that they pass around to the different churches and they just feast on it like it's
Yes.
the greatest steak they've ever had. And we're over here
Yes.
like, well, maybe Jesus didn't really
Yeah, let's
say all the things he
nuance.
said in the book of John. And it gets me upset because then I think about these African bishops that are like, where are you guys? Like, it's the affluence that we have here.
Yeah.
Pastor Jay, a few weeks ago on his episode, was talking about when you pastor here, it's like you're pastoring the rich young ruler who doesn't want to get rid of all their stuff,
Yeah.
And so I want to read this to you. This is and then you can say whatever you want to say, but I want to read you this quote from Rich Starnes. Is it Starnes?
Starnes,
From
yeah.
World Vision, former president.
Richard Stearns, sorry.
Starnes, yeah. And I just think this is a good quote to discuss because it kind of sounds good.
Yeah.
And I think people are like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. But we have to understand like what's really happening. So here's what he says. If as a Christian, you want the government to uphold your values on abortion, sexuality, and education, why don't you want them to reflect the Christian values of helping the poor, feeding the hungry, and welcoming the refugees? What do you think about that?
I mean, it's like a Goo Goo Doll song. Like it sounds really good, but I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
The lyrics are like, that's really interesting. But it's such a false, don't you think it's a false
It's a straw
dichotomy?
man.
Yeah,
It's
straw man.
because I think what he's getting at is that there are conservative Christians who would say, we don't want to rely on the government to feed everybody. And I think you're bringing up a very good reason why that might be the case, because
Yeah.
it comes along with DEI policies and
Yes.
pro-LGBTQ indoctrination and all of that. But I don't know. Have you ever met a Christian that doesn't want to feed the poor or wouldn't welcome a refugee? That was
the antithesis of
Yeah.
that. Like we're surrounded by them in our own community.
Yeah.
We just have a very simple difference of definition of refugee, meaning that if there is a way to get here, and because I spend so much time there, I know the struggles and I know how hard it is.
Yeah.
And I know that if we let everyone, there's 8 billion people in the world, let's say there's just 2 billion that are below the poverty line, which I think is the last number. At what point does it, or we don't have any more to do? Like at some point we're out of room, we're out of money.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be, practically speaking, it's literally what happened in Acts chapter 6. The widows were being overlooked, or is it Acts 7? They're being overlooked in the distribution of the food. So somebody had to sit down and say, this is how much we have.
Mm-hmm.
And no more. And we want to make sure that these guys have it, and these women both have it. So there's equal amounts. But they probably experience what I experience. I still experience it in Haiti every day. For everybody we feed, there's 20 that I can't.
Yeah.
I will literally run out of money before the world runs out of need. And so we want to help as many as we can. And at the same time, that's on a micro level in a church, but in the macro level in the U.S. government policies of it, like just wide opening our doors is
Yeah.
very dangerous
Right.
for us.
7 Weeks Coffee is America's pro-life coffee company, and they are on a mission to fund the pro-life movement one cup of coffee at a time. And they do such a great job. They are called 7 Weeks Coffee because at 7 weeks of gestation, the baby is the size of a coffee bean. And that's the same time that the heartbeat is clearly detected on an ultrasound, which is why they donate 10% of every sale to support pregnancy care centers across the country. And to date, they've raised over $1 million for these centers, and they've saved thousands of lives. And I absolutely love their coffee. I get my espresso beans from them every single month. And I'm kind of picky about what I eat and what I put in my body. And I love that their coffee's mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, low-acid, organically farmed. It checks all the boxes. And right now, when you subscribe to 7 Weeks, you're going to get a free 2-pack of their new single-serve brew bags. So go to 7weekscoffee.com, save 15% forever when you subscribe. But if you also use my code Alisa, you're going to get an additional 10% off your first order. That's a great way to just try it. You can always cancel that subscription later. So go to 7weekscoffee.com, use my code Alisa. That's up to 25% savings on your first order plus your free gift. 7weekscoffee.com, use my code Alisa. And there's a difference between loving the refugee and having open borders, which the progressives really
Yes.
that's what they mean by welcoming the refugee, is just throw open your borders. And which is actually, it's interesting. I was just doing a bit of research to respond to this progressive pastor online, and it's striking how often God speaks so positively of borders and walls and gates, and he establishes the borders, and there's order. I mean, even just I've been reading through the epistles and how just the idea of there being this hierarchy of authority and order within, even, the church submits to Christ, wives submit to their husbands, children obey your parents, slaves obey your masters. There's this hierarchy of order that God wants. And it's just, I think that the progressive talking points, which obviously are making their way into these organizations, even under the name of Christ in some cases all over the world, that are just poisoning. I mean, Satan is a good deceiver, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, what are what was it in Matthew chapter 7? There's wolves, there's dogs, and there's hogs that are all three different false prophet, false imageries of them. And the thing about a wolf is that what it looks like is not what it really is. And wolf by what it eats, and what they have been eating from that. At least the progressive wolves is. They're eating the souls of children. Like they're taking away their morals. They're literally crushing with ideology that really does. I guess it's kind of jumping the tracks, but when you hear somebody in Asia being lectured about marriage and equality, whatever words we use and phrase them with, like. They're thinking in a lot of ways like we really have really bad problems here,
like actual
problems. I even in Israel and other places you hear that we have such a luxury of the wealth of our nation that we can sit around having conversations about a word in the Bible like that's the biggest issue that we have to face. But with us as Jesus people, to go back to I guess what you had asked before, but there's a window open right now, and there are churches everywhere that are seizing it. I pray that more churches will leap into the Great Commission of the nations. There's a hunger for truth like I've never seen before. I thought about this on the way over. Actually, your father came out of the Jesus movement, and it was a movement that was born after all of the promises of free sex, free love, the sexual revolution, peace and love. Somewhere around 68 to 70, suddenly people were like, okay, the bills are due on these promises and there's no money in the account. Like we're miserable, we're diseased, we're lonely. And here comes a guy with flip-flops on a beach teaching, not very exciting tone, but he's teaching about peace and love and that revival, whatever you want to call it. I'm not even sure what you call it anymore, like a renewal, whatever, happened based on peace and love. I think what's happening right now, we just saw it in the New York Times this last week, the story of that young young men and women are now turning more to Christ than ever before, turning
Yeah.
to Christianity. But it's about,
And even more conservative values in some cases, like
yes,
with marriage and things.
yes,
Yeah.
completely rebelling
Yeah.
against it because I think the bills were due.
Mm-hmm.
And this, again, is about where the church can come involved. There's a difference between a social conservative and a Christian.
Right.
And if we allow the social conservatives to control the narrative without Christ in it, we're missing a huge window. But in our nation right now, truth and love are the two things that we have been promised from secular progressive humanists over the last 20 years, neo-Marxism, whatever, and it didn't work. I've got a 19-year-old son who's right in the middle of that going, none of that worked.
Right.
And he is, I mean, I took him with me to Nepal. We hiked to Everest Base Camp, and he had his big journal Bible with him, and he's 19 years old, and we're trying to shed weight because
Right.
it's heavy.
Yeah.
And he insisted on taking his Bible with him.
Wow.
And I took mine on my Kindle. I'm not quite that spiritual. I took the digital one because it didn't weigh anymore.
And I'm like, you have a phone, right?
Yeah, and I'm old. Like, I can't, this is so far. But that he grew up in a generation where everything he was being told by secular ideology was like self-evidently false. So he's turning to truth. And I think that here, as well as around the world, the window is open for us to be bold, clear, brokenhearted. We're not being glib with what the truth is, because the falsities, whether it's around gender ideologies, sexuality, again, creeping into the church, the numbers are incontrovertible. It doesn't make somebody feel better. It makes them feel worse. It doesn't make their life flourish. It makes it go the other direction for it. And so the gospel, literally coming back to that, is the answer. We will give them food. We will give them clean water. They might be born again, but their water's not born again. So it's a gift that we can give them, to give clean water with it. But without Jesus, all they've got is a well that will save their life for a day, but not their soul for eternity. And it's just not a good use of our energy.
When I talk to you and I think about the spiritual temperature all over the world, it seems like every time I talk to you, it seems very clear that what people are responding to is the blood of Jesus, the gospel. They're not wanting this watered down progressive gospel where there's no hell or heaven. They want justice because they've been ransacked by terrorists and all sorts of things. And why do you think so many pastors here in America are falling for all of this kind of woke stuff? Like, why are they going with it? Because it seems to me like, I don't want to assume motives for people. We know some motives have been sort of proven where you follow the money, and that we've talked about that on this podcast. But it seems like pastors are shy to speak against wokeness and maybe some of the cultural topics because they think, oh, well, that just makes you a culture warrior, and you don't want to be a culture warrior. You just want to like privately live your faith. Why is that when you see all over the world, it's like they're desperate for clarity. They're desperate for truth. They're not afraid to talk about the blood of Jesus.
And by the way, they're that in America right now. The idea of a seeker-sensitive movement that we saw, whatever, 80s, 90s, there are seekers. And what they're seeking is, who is going to tell my little boy that he can't be a girl?
Yeah, right.
Who's going to stand beside me and help me parent my family? Like, who's going to protect? You can't feed a dead sheep, right? And so... what was the question again, though?
Just why do you think so many pastors in America are falling for this stuff, or not speaking about it, or feeling afraid to be called a culture warrior or whatever they might get labeled as?
So here's my theory. I'd love to hear yours, by the way, because you think about this more than I do.
Yeah.
Because we went through that seeker-sensitive movement, there was an idea, which was... if we say, we want to not say anything offensive because we want to, quote, reach more people. So in our world, the music world, we said we wanted to reach people. What I really meant was I wanted to sell CDs. Right? So now, did we reach people? Yes. And good things happen. But when at the end of a night of a concert, I would ask my artists, how many CDs did we sell? How many tickets? So I'm saying out of one side of my mouth, the gospel is important, but on the other side, I'm showing them that it's not important. I think in the seeker-sensitive world, there was some sort of an idea that was put in place that anything that could be potentially considered offensive, we don't want to put any restrictions in front of for them to not hear the gospel. So I think the Rick Warrens of the world, it was born out of a good heart, an idea that probably made sense on paper,
Yeah.
and at the same time, obviously the world has changed. That was in the 90s when I think Aaron Renn talks about the negative, the neutral world.
Neutral world, yeah.
You know, so we're not there anymore
No.
anyway.
Yeah.
But arguably, even when we were there, I don't think it worked.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what because we never got around to discipleship to begin with.
Yeah.
But in the last 5 years, I have a lot of pastor friends in a lot of places, and they really love the Lord, that have bought into this notion that maybe they got it's seminary, maybe it might have been a Tim Keller. I don't know where they got it from, other than we just want to preach the word and nothing else really matters.
Yeah.
The gospel is on paper again. Sounds great. On a Sunday morning, what actually is the gospel?
Yeah.
Like, what is it exactly? What do you mean by the gospel? Is it that Jesus died to be a good example? Like, I think it's what Brian Zahn might teach. I can't remember how his, because that's not what he said at all. Like, is it that Jesus, came and lived to, model how we should be? Well, that's a crushing weight for us. We can't, or the Richard Rohr idea that he didn't die for our sins at all. That, we're all Christ. Those are the extreme edges of it. The pastors that I know personally seem to be, they didn't think of it, and many still don't think of it as their job. It's just not part of my, that's someone else's job.
Yeah.
And my response to that always is, probably the worst thing I could do on a Sunday morning is answer a bunch of questions nobody's asking.
Yeah.
Well, you're probably wondering this. Well, actually, I'm not wondering that. What I'm really wondering is, how do I navigate this specific situation with my marriage?
That's it. That's it right there. And how do I apply what you're teaching in the Bible to all these different areas that you don't seem to be talking about?
And might I add, especially if there's a pastor listening, the bar for courage is so low.
Right. It really is.
That like you don't have to really go that extreme. Like I've said, like a man can't have a baby or something, and I'll get an email that was so courageous.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, wow, the world is so crazy right now that even that I could be considered courageous, with it. But I think that the original question is that what is causing pastors to not, and on the one hand, there are more and more and more that are. 2020 changed a lot.
Yes, it did.
For a lot of pastors, including myself. And there's a group of about 20 pastors that I'm in a text message thread with, that we've got together last year and basically just decided we're locking arms. We're going to preach the truth. The time for nuance is gone. We're in a hostile world. And what we need more than anything is clarity, not more confusion. They can get confusion the rest of the week, but for today, we got to bring them clarity. And it has meant that we've had to, fortunately, I was always a nerd. I mean, I was a news junkie even when I was a kid, so that sort of came naturally to me, but it doesn't to everybody. But we've all had to begin to become educated on things that we never thought we needed to be educated on. And so I'm hopeful that obviously resources like what you're doing, there's resources out there where pastors can catch up to that. And again, to a pastor listening, our church has exploded in the last 2 years. I'm not saying anything different than I was saying 15 years ago.
You just haven't stopped saying the things that you were saying 15 years ago. Right.
And the culture shifted to a hunger for truth now that wasn't maybe there. And I don't know how long we'll be there. So we've got to seize that moment here and seize it around the world as well. Because they are hungry for truth in Nepal. They're hungry for truth in Pakistan. They're hungry for truth in India.
I've been thinking about this a lot, about how the Bible, there's 3 institutions that God instituted. That's the family, the government, and the church. And what I think, motivation wise, as far as pastors go, it can run the gamut. You can have a pastor that's just wants to get the op-ed in the New York Times, and that's what he's after. But I've also met a lot of very sincere, really good, godly pastors that maybe just, well, I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to isolate people. I don't want to make people feel this way or that way. And I get that. I understand that, because they're actually motivated out of their heart to not not push someone away that they could maybe possibly disciple. So that's probably the best case scenario. But the problem with all of this is that you think about those three institutions, and I'll add culture, because culture is sort of just what is around. That's this pool we swim in, right? And what I've started to discover is that, because I've said this on the podcast, I tried really hard to not talk about any politics on this podcast. And I was just like, I'm going to be apolitical. You can't. You actually can't be apolitical, because here's what'll happen. And this is a very real situation that happened to a friend of mine, where because now abortion is considered to be a political issue by the world,
Yep.
this person's church actually they got up and said, well, we're not going to be talking about politics, so we're not going to be addressing the issue of abortion anymore. They just said that we're not going to address that from the pulpit. And so they're playing the world's game by saying, well, the world says this is political, so we're not going to talk about it anymore. And then I have another friend, and he said this openly on Facebook, but he was actually disfellowshipped from his church because I actually, I don't know if he's an elder or not, but he went on his Facebook and he basically said, I don't care who you do vote for in the positive, but the Democratic Party is the party of death. They're promoting everything that Satan wants to destroy lives with, abortion,
Yes.
unfettered access to abortion, mutilation of bodies, all the stuff, the culture of death. And he said, I don't personally believe that you as a Christian can vote this way. And that was his conviction. He got
Mhm.
disfellowshipped from his church
Wow.
over that, because not so much because maybe the church, I suspect maybe a lot of people agreed with him, but because you're just not supposed to say those things out loud.
Right.
And so what I think is going on is when you fail to apply biblical principles, especially in those three institutions, church, family, government,
Mhm.
we can't not talk about government. It's biblical. It's an institution that God
Right.
put in scripture. And then culture. Then what'll happen is, if you're talking about everything but culture, then, well, Satan's going to come in through culture. If you're
Exactly.
talking about everything but politics, well, great. And then I've got an open door in politics. That's why, like, I spoke with a group of pastors recently, and one of the questions was, what are people, like, as I travel around,
Mm.
like, what are the average Christians really needing from their pastors? Which I
Hmm.
thought was a great question.
That's a great question.
And I said, they are desperate for clarity. They're desperate for
Huh.
political clarity. They're desperate for ethical clarity, biblical clarity, as it would apply to all of the things they're like the teacher that goes to her job and is being required to put a rainbow sticker and a safe space sticker in her classroom. She needs biblical clarity, and she doesn't need for you to make that an issue of conscience.
Right.
Or, same-sex weddings. Like, they are desperate for you to lead them
Yeah.
and tell them what the Bible says about these things, because it's so easy to say, well, no, there are certainly issues that are
Yeah.
personal conscious issues.
Sure.
Of course, we would all agree about that. But I'm sorry, mutilating children's bodies in the name of transgenderism is not one of
Oh,
those.
it's a human rights issue. That's a
This is
biblical,
a biblical
theological.
principle. So
Yeah.
I think that might be what going on is that pastors have compartmentalized in, politics from culture, from ethics, and then the Bible. It's like, well, if we talk about it, we'll talk about it in the Bible, but you can end up really failing to give your people instruction on how, like, what does that teacher do? Does she put the sticker up or not? She needs your counsel. She needs
Yes.
your guidance. And so I think there's
There's wisdom. I
yeah.
totally agree with you, because even as you're saying it, my brain is cranking with conversations I've had with people in our church, at local high schools. They're being forced to use the preferred, quote unquote, preferred pronouns.
Yeah.
What
Right.
do I do here? Like, these are rubber meets the road, I could lose my job
Yeah.
kind of questions that, if we don't address them, someone else will. And it's either going to be someone on TikTok,
That's right.
somebody that, and even inside of the halls of, whether it's local government, even local schools, if we have ceded that all to godless voices because we are not supposed to talk about politics, or we're not supposed to engage, then all we've done is leave that for godless voices
Mhm.
to lead the charge. And then we end where we are now. The
Yeah.
logical conclusion, and one of the things I learned right in the last 5 years was that I spent so much time overseas. I mean, I live in, Middle Tennessee. This is one of the most conservative pockets in the world, and was gobsmacked at what I saw, and realized just right under my own nose, because I had viewed, and still do, by the way, the view that the church is God's plan. It's his vehicle for, the Great Commission. But that doesn't mean that we let everybody else run for school board because we're too busy with the church.
Right.
And so we've even encouraged our people in our church world to engage in running for city council.
Yeah.
Put your voice out there. Godly
Go to
people.
the PCA meetings and
Yes.
all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that means you can't serve in a parking lot on Sunday, so be it. We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
But if you have to choose with it, but I think you're right that by allowing secular progressive humanists to say what is political and not political, like why do they get to say?
Why do they get to say?
Why do they get to
Right.
be the ones to say that? And the answer is they don't. So just because you say it's political doesn't mean it is. And just because you got mad and stormed out, which has happened to me many times,
Yeah.
I sort of take that as it's heartbreaking, but saying that a man can't be a woman, which actually that did happen, where I was specifically talking about, what I was talking about was Demi Lovato.
Mm.
And it was a paper on Demi Lovato where she'd gone from being a they them to a whatever, and then in this article she basically says that, and I don't know what I'll be next year. This is a Washington Post story.
Yeah.
And me saying that. So what happened? We moved the needle from born this way to choose whatever way. Do you see what happened here? In the culture, it changed. The ground shifted. That's the sand that Jesus said, "Don't build your foundation on."
Yeah.
But I do remember a family just literally storming out, and making a scene and screaming in the lobby that we'll never come back here again. And as heartbreaking as that is, the other however many hundreds of people there, they needed to hear that. There were teenagers that needed to hear that.
Yeah.
And so if the price that I'm paying is somebody angry, and I would encourage other pastors, if the only thing you're afraid of is you're going to, quote, offend somebody, that's the wrong litmus test.
Yeah,
the question is it true or is it not? And then let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, final words. If you could just grab every Christian by the collar, shake them and tell them something, what would it be?
Oh, golly. Just one thing.
What comes to mind?
The gospel is everything.
Oh, yeah.
It's everything. Whether I've been in the deepest parts of the bush of Africa or out on Reynolds Road where I live now in Marshall County, the whole world is in a race to be saved by their works. They're not using that language,
right?
But if I can just get this right enough, if I can just do this, then I will. Which then, of course, is a religion. I'm going to cancel everybody else. It's the answer here. It's the answer in. We rescued 100 kids from South Sudan about 5 years ago. It was 6 years ago. What we didn't know, we brought them back to our school in Kampala, and they took up a whole floor, bunk beds, refugee kids. Within a day, they're wanting to kill each other. And what we didn't know was these were two completely different tribes.
Wow.
And they're not mad at each other for what they did to each other. They're mad at each other for what their grandparents did to each other. And how do you end that cycle of violence, of revenge? And the answer is the gospel.
Yeah, it isn't DEI, that's for sure.
No, because there are black kids and black kids. Like, who gets to choose? Like, it's a year later. Now, this has been 6 years now. Some of those kids are about to graduate this year. And they're friends. They're in each other's weddings. They're going back to their villages with that gospel. That is the hope for their future. It's the hope for my future. The weight of, as a pastor, even I've realized when I'm feeling overwhelmed and the weight of it all, then there's somewhere that I've disconnected from the truth of Jesus and my little worldly reality. I gotta, it's like a theological chiropractic adjustment. I just need to pop back into place with it. And so I, that's pretty broad, but of course I just looked up and saw another gospel. So that's not where
huge.
I came from. But that's why that book matters.
Yeah.
That's why it matters, because I think Pastor Johnny said on his interview that he was quoting whatever theologian, whatever comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you.
I think it was Tozer who said that.
Yeah, of course it had to have been, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the gospel for me. And I keep coming back to it, We'll keep giving out free sandwiches, but if we don't give out the hope that goes with it, then the cycles of war continue. The
Mm.
cycles, you can't bomb an ideology out of somebody, but you can gospel it out. And that's our job as the church. It's our job. It's our privilege. So we get to
Yeah.
do this. He lets us do this. What a great God.
Amen. Well, that's a great place to end. I want to thank my guest, Darren Tyler, pastor of Conduit Church in Franklin, Tennessee. And I hope you're enjoying this pastor series. We've got more episodes coming for you. And let's remember, as we pursue Christ, to keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin. We'll see you next time.
So pray for me and I will pray for you. No turning right or left, we'll make it through. The road that's narrow and the gate that's small. Don't give up, it's gonna